Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Merlin review. I'm going to be talking about The Eternals. This one is apparently the most divisive MCU movie yet. I checked Rotten Tomatoes. Looks like it's below 50%. It's like I think about 48% right now with from critics. Although I checked the popcorn with the general audiences and it was much better, about 80, 81%. So definitely, not universally loved and certainly getting some pushback. But uh, I decided to go see it. And I'll admit I had no real interest in seeing this film just because I know these characters are a bit more obscure. I'm not as attached to them. And I know most of them fairly well, at least, from a casual perspective. And some of them certainly much more than others, just from, reading a lot of comics years ago. But Eternals, I didn't know quite as well. And plus, combined with the things I was hearing, I didn't really have much interest in seeing it. To be fair, I kind of had the same feeling about Shang-Chi when that was coming out because I knew even less about that character. I'd never heard of him. The trailers didn't really impress me very much. Some of my friends were kind of naysaying but it got universal praise. I heard a lot of people really liked it, was doing really well. I ended up seeing it and loving it. I even saw it twice. It might actually be one of my favorites. I thought it was extremely original and fun. Really cool movie. One of the better theatrical experiences I've had recently. Certainly this year, right up there with Dune. So I had a lot of fun with that. This movie, I decided I guess I'd give it a chance too, just because honestly I had a free day. I saw it with my buddy Justin. I was like, you know what? I don't have anything else going on this Saturday, so why not? I guess I'll see it in a theater. Try to support them. Um, really, I don't even know why I did it. I just thought, like, I really have nothing else to do. I have the time, even though it is 2.5 hours again. But sure, why not? So with Eternals, I actually knew these characters a little more than I knew Shang-Chi, only because I read one of their trade collections, I think, about them. I forget who did the artwork, if it was John Romita Jr., one of his things. Basically, all I really knew about the Eternals from that one comic I read, what I took away from that was the artwork was cool. And they were basically the Marvel version of the Sandman characters, like the Endless. They're basically like these kind of like these powerful gods that sort of watch over humanity, and they're very powerful, but they're like not directly involved, but they kind of deal with things on a whole nother scale. Not exactly the same, but that's like the closest comparison. The Eternals are basically like the Sandman of Marvel. But I read that comic and I enjoyed it. I did, but I'll admit I don't have much memory of it, and I never had a desire to read it again or explore those characters again. So make of that what you will. But I was like, okay, like I was like, I knew who they were, and I'm like, all right, we're getting to that point where we're really kind of looking for, more obscure characters, and I'm thinking, all right, it might be time to really dip into the Fantastic Four and X-Men before we have to reboot here because I think we're kind of, Marvel's done a really good job of making some really fun movies. We all know this, but I think that they're kind of they might be running on fumes soon here. In all honesty, if we're going for the Eternals, I think Guardians of the Galaxy was great, but that was kind of, as I think Dan pointed out to me or somebody, that was kind of at the peak of Marvel's creativity when they were really in the flow of it. And I think the Guardians were just very fun characters with a lot of interesting personalities, and they had the right cast and director, and everything kind of came together for that really well. It was a very unique thing. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. Probably still my favorite, if not one of my favorite MCU movies. Both of them are really good. But getting into Eternals, finally, all right, the question is it how bad is it really? Like, is it as bad as everyone's kind of been making it out to be? Because everyone I've ever talked to said it like it wasn't very good or it sucked. And that's the word of mouth that's been going along and spreading, even though apparently people that are seeing it like it. There's a bit of a contradiction there. And I think having viewed it myself, uh, I really don't know if it's the worst MCU movie. Uh, but it's probably down there. It could be the worst in some ways. Maybe technically speaking, it might be the worst one. But remember, it's kind of like the Pixar argument where they do have some movies which aren't very good, but because it's still a certain level of filmmaking, their worst movies are still better than many others. So I think this is kind of more with that analogy. So, all right, basically, I would say the movie comes off kind of mediocre at a lot of points, and it really is kind of in that mediocre space, mostly because a lot of it is kind of flat and mediocre and sometimes boring, and the rest of it is potentially interesting and fun and different from Marvel, but definitely messy with a lot of conflicting ideas. Pacing is a big issue. How they handled exposition and character development was kind of off. Just how they used their time was really the worst thing. Like I can tell you right now. All right. Essentially, if you haven't seen the movie yet, it's basically, like I said, they're essentially these gods, this alien race of extremely super powerful people who are kind of like celestial beings, that created by celestial beings, part of a celestial group, essentially gods. Who I kind of I think are comparable to the Justice League with their different powers, who just kind of guard humanity and guide humanity, of kind of watching from the shadows. And the the Eternals have been basically sent to really hold off from the greater threat of these deviants, these monstrous things that are trying to attack different planets, and they basically protect life and kind of guide them. So there's a lot of interesting ideas about mythology, kind of fused with a lot of classic sci-fi stuff. So I see some parallels, and there are a lot of stuff like Stargate kind of reminded me of a little bit. So some of those ideas are certainly there, like kind of a powerful alien culture on another level, kind of guiding humanity is interesting. So, and I think that these characters, they've been kind of obviously there for a long time guarding it, but they're waiting for their chance to be called home, and then they're just kind of waiting out among humanities quietly until a threat kind of comes up, and they realize, oh, there are actually more deviants, even though we thought we killed them all, and the band has to get back together. And then eventually they kind of reveal that, oh, maybe the reason we're here isn't very good, and there's going to be this new celestial being that's going to be born, and it turns out, oh, spoilers, that they feed off of planets with life forces and intelligent life like humans, and the deviants were also created to kind of just sort of you know get rid of any predators that might have actually been more of a threat to them. So really, they're kind of pitted against each other as part of a bigger plan, really just to kind of farm these planets to feed off these more powerful beings that in turn create new life, but at the expense of killing a lot of people, maybe unnecessarily. So it's possible the people they've been working for might have been flawed. So they're kind of questioning, what they're supposed to do, their path, their identity, how to handle it. They're basically created like essentially powerful robots. So their memories are just kind of recycled. And, there's a lot of interesting ideas there about kind of sort of responsibility, and a lot of interesting commentary about humanity and what to do with power, choices you make and how they define you, that sort of thing. So they basically decide to go against their previous plan and fight against their boss, essentially this big celestial guy. uh, and there's also this other deviant that's kind of feeding off the Eternals and is kind of becoming self-aware and realizing that he's kind of part of this plan too and isn't happy about it. But that's basically the plot of the movie. The first half an hour or so I was watching this, I was extremely bored. Like I felt my mind wandering constantly, worse than it ever has. And I was like, I was trying to be invested, but no, I was really wandering. And it kind of starts off in that classic way, and you have the text giving off exposition at the beginning, which I've never seen in a Marvel movie, which I'm not saying that never works, but I think traditionally that's not a very good sign. It's not a very interesting way to do it. I mean, obviously, Star Wars kind of got away with that with the Flash Gordon sort of intros, but even then, you've got the weird tilt and the big music, and even those aren't, this one was just kind of like flat screen, not going slowly going up. And to be fair, it's like I said, I feel like there is a place for that, but with Marvel, it was just not very creative. And the thing is, they dropped some basic exposition, which I think takes away some of the mystery and excitement of learning what's going on. And then they're going to drop exposition in more natural ways several times throughout the movie anyway. So it seemed like that was unnecessary. And really, the whole first part of it, we kind of introduced some of these characters, and there's a lot of action. Like the revenant monsters start attacking pretty soon, and there was all these action scenes going on, which looked kind of cool. But I was amazed how uninvested I was because I didn't know the characters. I didn't have time to really know any of them very well uh, by that point. So I didn't care about any of the action. I didn't care for like the first half an hour, 45 minutes of the movie. I was like, I don't know who they are. I don't know why I should care about them. I don't know them. But after we get to that point and more of the characters start meeting up and there are more flashbacks about what happened and why they separated, and we actually start to see more of their relationships with each other, okay, the actors get to have some chemistry and shine. And then okay, there are some more emotional moments, there's some more humor, and then it feels more like okay, these characters are more identifiable with personalities, at least some of them are. Okay, I'm a little more invested and I know more about what's going on because there's these flashbacks and because there's more exposition. So okay, we have more of an idea of why we should care and the struggle that they're going through and the decisions they have to make. Okay, that's fine. But it took us like almost an hour before that really started to happen. And that's really the biggest issue. The biggest issues right there are kind of both lumped in, right? So the pacing's kind of an issue because it wasn't used very well. The first half an hour, 45 minutes is just stuff going on, and we don't really know who the characters are. So the story is kind of a bit weak there. And then even though the actors are doing a pretty good job, and then we finally start to get into it, but it takes a while for us to actually care about all the characters because there's like 10 of them. There's a whole group of characters that kind of like with the new Justice League movie, the Zack Snyder one, kind of dumping in a bunch of characters. All right, they're there all together, but we don't really know these characters that well. So I think they did okay in that version. Even better, I think, in the director's cut, but even though that took a lot longer. But even that had the benefit of like these are extremely well-known characters. You get the general idea of Aquaman or the Flash. So, and you had a couple of the characters already established. The Eternals, you have to work from the ground up with everybody, and they're all kind of lumped together in the same sort of situation anyway. So there's kind of some bleeding over there in terms of what makes them more identifiable. But they do have their own powers, they do have their own personality, they do have some of their own dilemmas. But even though I do think the actors do a good job and the writers managed to give them all something distinct, it took a while to get there. And even then, it feels like a lot of the characters just kind of fall to the side. And really, even the main characters don't seem that well developed or focused on enough because it's really an ensemble. So I feel like I was drifting. I felt like even though we had our main character, she wasn't really the main focus a lot of the time. I felt like we didn't really see her go through as much of an arc. Like it was there, but once again, not fleshed out. The movie doesn't really have a real main character exactly. It doesn't feel like it anyway. And so that's kind of the big issue. So pacing with how they handled the story, the exposition, and really just time for character development and the fact that you've got all these new characters introduced and you barely know them. It's kind of uneven. Then there's also the other big issue with that I kind of have with the movie in terms of the writing. And I saw there were like five screenwriters, so I think that there's a lot of ideas thrown in there, and there's a lot of interesting themes about identity and destiny and responsibility, and big ideas about how you should what you should do. A lot of Star Trek vibes in terms of interfering with other cultures and societies. And there's some really good scenes, which I kind of wish we could have utilized even more when the Eternals are kind of watching different events in human history and they're kind of getting involved, but not really. And then there's one with the atomic bomb, which is probably the most powerful one. Is like, and the one character who kind of his speciality is technology and creating things and wants to help them advance. And he gets to that point, and he kind of gives up on humanity for a while, but then he kind of eventually turns back by helping build a family. So I thought that was an example of a powerful scene. But I kind of thought we could have explored more with that. And that one was like a 2 minutes or something, and it was done really well. So not all of them were handled quite that well. So there was really good potential there. But there are basically two villains in the movie, and I won't spoil it, I guess. But the one villain in the movie is one of the Eternals. Is kind of basically decides that he doesn't want to go against his masters and against the typical plan, just wants to go along with things and kind of go betrays his friends and is actually still working for the main celestial. So that it's just kind of that character's dilemma, basically about deciding, what path should he go on, if what should he consistently do, and so there's kind of you've got sort of the one character going to the dark side or really staying with the dark side. Yeah, so which could have potentially been more interesting, but they don't really go very far into that, having a lot of discussions and clashes with other characters about those two points of view. And there's also the other villain who is the one revenant monster who is draining their powers and is learning from their memories and sort of just kind of almost becoming like an alpha leader that wants to rebel against the system too, because he feels like as predators they're just kind of being used unfairly and killed off as well, um, and really feels kind of angry about their part in the whole plan. So that was potentially interesting, and that basically goes nowhere. So you've got two villains who both kind of serve similar ideas, offering perspectives, and neither one is handled to fruition, like most of the other characters in the movie. So it's like they were both interesting, like a lot of things in this movie. There are a lot of interesting ideas, but they weren't fully explored. So you probably could have just honestly dropped one for the other, because in the marketing they kind of make it seem like the monster is going to be the main villain, but he's secondary and isn't really the main focus. So those are kind of some big negatives with the movie. But positives, though, I will say the cast is really good, and they all do a really good job. I like them all. I thought Angelina Jolie was great, just kind of as the Wonder Woman type, with also kind of this dark personality. She kind of loses it sometimes. Um, I thought that the main cast was pretty good overall. The Rob Stark was pretty good. I think he was Icarus. Angelina Jolie was Athena. If I can remember them all. I think the main one was Cersei. There's Sprite, who's kind of the younger one, um, who is kind of stuck aging, and that's in as a child and can't really even blend in with humans and couldn't really experience growing up in any way that part of her life. So that was kind of her issue. A lot of interesting things there. I think there was Gilgamesh, strong guy. I forget the guy who was an inventor. I feel like there's the Shadow Warrior guy. Yes, but I think all those characters were fun when you actually the actors did a good job with them, and when we finally started to get into the meat of their relationships and their dilemmas. Oh, there's also what's that? That one guy's name. The guy that can control people's minds. I forget his name. It was like actually I forget it. Say there are a bunch of characters, but yeah, basically they all have these really distinctive powers, and I think that even though they basically were essentially mostly Justice League, I thought they were noticeable enough. Oh yeah, there was the one character that was deaf for some reason, even though I guess celestial. I mean, good for diversity, inclusivity, inclusiveness. I'm not sure. There we go. Which I didn't quite understand. It was just a weird detail. I didn't really understand that, but still, I thought the character was fun, even though that part of it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Uh, but like I said, all the actors do a good job of what they have, and the characters actually have interesting, distinctive personalities and dilemmas, and some good humor that is there. There are some good moments throughout. There are some meaty moments for sure. I like the fact the main character is basically the Fullmetal Alchemist. She can just, basically change matter and make things into other things. I thought that was kind of funny. We think that'd be more powerful or interesting, but I don't think it really is, though. It becomes sort of important later, kind of. Yeah, so there is that. I will say I think that I agree with Justin that the one character who basically can shoot like plasma energy beams from his hands. He does literally like Kamehameha blasts. He goes into he was probably the best character in the movie because in about the second half he had the most humor and the meta stuff because he literally goes and becomes a Bollywood star and stars in and directs movies and has been passing himself off because they don't age as the grandfather and the father, so he can just keep making movies in India. And he has a lot of fun meta jokes about just filmmaking and about the character in general, the characters in general, and he getting really into his own franchise and the character, which is pretty cool. And he starts making a documentary about him and the other Eternals, which is pretty funny. He's got a sidekick who's pretty cool, adds a little bit of a human perspective. So that stuff's pretty good. I think he was probably the best character in the movie, and he also has some good dramatic moments as well because he, interestingly enough, feels bad about losing his family and being separated from them and abandoning one of the other characters, Sprite, I believe, because she couldn't age. So there's that issue, and he actually also kind of wants to go along with the Celestials' plan because he just can't handle the idea of really going against it. Like, what's that going to mean? It's too frightening for him, actually. So and he really just wants to not lose his family. So even he has these good dramatic moments too. He was probably the best character in the movie, so he was pretty good, and I think all the other characters had some pretty fun moments as well. Actually, I did actually like all the characters once they got time to be focused on. And like I said, I think it deals with some pretty big ideas and some big philosophical questions, which Marvel doesn't really do quite to that scale, quite as much. I think there's still some cool visuals with some of the monsters, with some of the action sequences are pretty cool. Uh, but so I think in some ways it was very ambitious thematically for sure. But the problem is it was just very unfocused and messy and underdeveloped, and the pacing was an issue. So the problem is that for me, it ended up being kind of very middling. Like I thought there was a lot of cool creativity and potential for ideas, and some of that shines through, but it got kind of bogged down by I think maybe a lack of focus with what to do with some of the screen time. So I don't think if you're hearing that it's like terrible, I don't think that's true. I just think it's honestly probably just not as focused and as a lot of the other Marvel films, which partially to the credit of I think it's a movie that tries to break away from the formula a little bit and tackles some different subject matter and very different characters. But unfortunately, I think that being a little more experimental meant that there was just a lot that kind of fell flat, unfortunately. But a lot of creativity there, and who knows? I could watch it again, and maybe it could improve over time. Like there were things about it I really did like, but mostly just the fact that the first like third of the movie it takes a while to really get going. It doesn't really feel like it gets good until about 45 minutes or something. So that I can't really ignore that. And the ending was kind of like ending also fell really flat and kind of out of nowhere. And I will confess too, the post credit sequence did not give me any incentive to really to see the next movie, to see learn about the sequels. Like I found like I wasn't really that interested. So maybe they could improve upon it in a sequel. I think that there's definitely something interesting you could do with these characters, but I think they'd have to focus on just a couple of them because I just think there's too many. Guardians had what like the first movie was like what five characters, which I think was able to handle. This one has I think almost twice as many. So for the first movie, I don't know. I think that might have been a little too much. But hey, I think it was tough to handle. Maybe some people liked it more than I did. I see that the popcorn is fairly high, so maybe a lot of people did enjoy it for being different. In some ways, it's kind of fresh. I just think it's a little messy, but I'm kind of curious to see what other people said. Did other people like it? Maybe I missed something. Maybe people that are more familiar with the Eternals might get more out of it because I was only kind of generally familiar with them. But hey, if you did like it or didn't, or there's something I missed or something that could have enhanced my understanding of it, please let me know in the comments. I appreciate you watching or listening. Trying to get videos out, every once in a while. I know I've got probably another couple busy weeks here, but I'm hoping come December, January, maybe I'll get a few things more consistently out there. But we'll see. In the meantime, everybody take care and stay magical.